that. Hello there, and welcome back to LeEdFollow. So today we're going to be talking about the top 10 most common mistakes that 86 and BRZ owners make when modifying their cars. Now, whether you have a first generation or a second generation Toy Brew, there are a number of common pitfalls that you need to make sure you avoid. So, number one on my top 10 list is the suspension. Now, in my opinion, the BRZ and GT86 came out of the factory with such a fantastically perfect setup that I don't think you should change it personally. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't get lowering springs or you shouldn't get coilovers or you shouldn't get anti-roll bars. However, you should be very careful about which ones you buy if that's what you want to do. The problem you're going to find though with aftermarket coilovers and springs is that they have a much stiffer spring rate than standard, and the standard springs are pretty good actually. I mean, the ride is quite firm. I wouldn't want it any firmer than this myself, otherwise it would ruin it as a road car. And I guess this is why if you look on the owners clubs, if you look on the forums, there's always people selling coilovers and lowering springs, and the same goes for anti-roll bars. People are always selling them because I think a lot of people probably buy them thinking that, hey, this is going to be a good purchase because my other cars, I've done these mods on and they've been fine. But the 86 and the BRZ come out the factory really well set up by people who know what they're doing. So when you start to change stuff, you undo all their good work. The other thing to consider is if you're lowering the ride of the car, you're naturally pushing the geometry out on the wheels. So then you have to spend a lot of extra money getting everything dialed back in again so the car drives correctly, doesn't tramline, etc, etc. And my opinion on these cars is that the standard roll bars are perfectly fine. Yes, bit of body roll, but it means you've got a very communicative car. You can really tell what the car's doing through the corners. If you're going to build a dedicated car that's only going to be used on track, that you may trailer to the track and back and it never goes on the road, then yeah, sure, go for a really hard setup of coilovers or springs or roll bars to give yourself that edge on the track. But for the average person who's going to be using their car on the road, you need to kind of hold yourself back on what you do to the suspension so that you don't ruin the day-to-day ride of the car. Because take it from me, I've made that mistake before with previous cars, like my Celica GT4. I made it so track and race focused that driving it on the road was absolutely awful, and I'd start to make excuses for why I wouldn't take that car out. So the second thing on my list is aftermarket alloy wheels. Now, a lot of people change these on, especially on 86s and BRZs, because it's a tuner car and the looks of the car are quite dramatically changed by the wheels that you have on it. But you've got to be really careful if you're changing the wheels purely for looks alone. Because yeah, bigger, wider wheels may look fat or give the car stance. But the problem with that is you're going to, again, fall into the realms of ruining the handling of the car. Now, going for a wider wheel generally means you're also going to have a wider tyre. Well, or you're going to stretch the tyre. Either way, what you're going to do is you're going to make the steering a lot more heavy, and you're going to increase the likelihood that the car is going to tramline. So when you're buying aftermarket wheels, you may decide to get up a size. So for example, these are 18s, but the standard cars tend to come with 17-inch wheels. Now the problem with that is, as you go up the wheel size, you're going to need to bring the tyre wall down in size in order to keep the same rolling radius. And the rolling radius is going to be the number of revolutions the wheel makes, and that information is fed to the speedo. If you change the rolling radius, it can affect your speedo. It can either make it overread or underread depending on which wheel and tyre option you go for. Of course, even making this tyre wall smaller will make the ride harder, because it's not all the suspension that's doing all the work. You know, you've got the compression in the suspension, but you've also got the compression in the tyre wall. So the smaller this is, technically the harder the ride is going to be. Now there are options. You could actually go for a bigger wheel and go for a bigger tyre, which gives you that comfort, but you're increasing the rolling radius. So you've got to be prepared that your speedo is going to be knocked out slightly. Now I've only gone up for a slightly higher tyre wall, and it's made very little difference to the change in my speedo, but it means that the ride is no harder than stock, which is a really good thing if you're going to daily the car. And yes, it has affected my speedo, but the speedos come out of the factory under reading. So, for example, if you go through a speed camera and it says 30 mile an hour, your true speed is probably more like 27, 28. So by going for a larger rolling radius wheel, you're actually just soaking up that little area of inconsistency. But if you go too far, you go the other way, where you'll be going down the road doing what is an indicated 30, but you're actually doing 31, 32, etc. That is a recipe for getting a speeding ticket through a speeding camera. Number 3, spoilers. Now, pretty much any of the factory spoilers don't give you much in the way of downforce there. They're there really for show. Now, if you want a spoiler that does do something, then you can get one of those big GT wings that you see on race cars. The only problem with those are that they look a bit daft on a road car, and also you're going to add a load of drill holes to your bodywork. So if you decide to change back, you're going to have to take it to a body shop to get all of that damage undone. In my opinion, unless you really hate the stock spoiler, leave it as stock, or maybe get the TRD one. It's a very nice looking spoiler. Number 4, fuel. Now, I've mentioned this before in some of my previous videos, but under here, it clearly states you shouldn't be using anything less than 98 RON. The car wasn't designed for running on supermarket 95 or 97. If it is really a problem that you want to keep running costs down and you want to use supermarket fuel, then please, at the minimum, use like Tesco Momentum 99. I only run this on SO 99 Supreme because that's what all the Cosworth supercharger was mapped for, and it's a premium fuel. I don't like to cheap out on the fuel. So running on 95 or 97 is going to cause the ECU to pull back the timing, and you're going to be down on power, which kind of defeats the point of having a sports car. Number 5, checking your oil on a regular basis. If it's a daily drive, then try to check it at least once a week if you can, just to make sure the oil's not getting low. If it's like a weekend toy, maybe once a month. Me personally, because this isn't my main car, I actually check the oil every time I take the thing out, because it sometimes sits for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and I want to make sure that if there are any issues, if there are any leaks, then I don't go driving the car down the road and not knowing about them. So check around the filter, make sure it's not leaking there, have a look at the under tray right down there. You're going to be able to easily spot if there's any oil leaking at the front of the engine. If you see the car overfilled by about half a litre when it's cold, that's normal. Toyota tend to do that. Essentially, the oil reading should be done when the engine's hot. So when you've had it parked up and you're going to check the oil, being over the dipstick by about 1 centimetre to 1 inch, not really a big deal. It's kind of normal for me to bring it back from a service and Toyota's filled it to that level. As I've said in previous videos, if you're going to track the car, get yourself a BaffledSump and also get yourself an oil cooler, because it's really important to keep the car cool if you take it out on track. Heat is the big killer for FA20 engines. 6, body kits and side skirts. It's no secret that I'm really not a fan of body kits. I think the car looks fantastic as it is from the factory. Even things like the TRD kit and the Aero kit, I think they don't do the car any favours. And don't even get me started on the Rocket Bunny kits. I despise them with a passion. Now, you might think, side skirts, they're going to protect the paintwork and stop stones from hitting it and rust from setting in. Well, yes, however, generally, when you put a side skirt on, it traps dirt in there against the metal, and that is going to accelerate rust even faster than if you actually had no side skirt at all. Something to think about. If you're going to fit a body kit, make sure that the side of the car are massively cleaned, like you're going to eat your dinner off of them before you put side skirts on, and seal them in so that dirt can't get in under the bodywork. Now, saying that, if you're running a big power car and you need to have much wider tyres, which means wider wheels, in order to get that power down, then yeah, practically you may well need a wide body kit just to put those wheels under the bodywork. So that's a situation where I approve of body kits, but generally speaking, I think the 86 and the BRZ came out of the factory looking perfect. And when you look at the TRD or the Aero 86s, I think that it's really much a case of less is more. But that's just my 2 cents. Number 7, changing the standard seats. Well, the Subaru seats are actually some of the best in the business. They're really, really comfortable. You can really do a long journey in them without your back breaking. And then the other thing is that they hold you really, really well through the corners. The bolsters, fantastic. I've never wanted more than what these seats provide. I mean, maybe if you've got a full-on race car with a roll cage and you're going to wear a hands device, then yeah, you'd probably want some FIA approved buckets. But if you're not doing that, the standard seats are really, really good. My advice, don't change them. Really, just don't. Number 8, aftermarket exhausts. Now, be very careful when you're buying an aftermarket exhaust. If you want to make the car a bit more powerful or a bit louder, then be very careful about what you're going to buy. This is the Cosworth exhaust system that came as part of my Cosworth conversion, and it's got what they call a Helmholtz resonator. And that really makes sure that you don't get any drone or rasp. But compared to a lot of aftermarket systems, this is incredibly quiet. When shopping for aftermarket exhausts, seriously take time to consider what you're going to use the car for. Will you have to get up at like 5 AM every morning to go to the office? Because if that is the case, your neighbours aren't going to like you very much if you start it up every morning, you wake the entire street up. So it's something to think about. And the other thing is, if you have to do long journeys, do you have to do a lot of long journeys for work or for social reasons, then get an exhaust that doesn't drone. Because seriously, an aftermarket exhaust that drones will just drive you crazy on long motorway journeys. Are you going to do track days? Because that's the other thing. Make sure you get an exhaust that is not going to exceed the decibels of track days. This thing is very close to the limit, so I'm not going to make any further changes to it because right now I am struggling to get on track days as it is. So, number 9, induction kits. Personally, I think they're a waste of time. I'll tell you why. Most induction kits, they just come as they are, just the filter, and the problem with that is it's going to be sucking in all of the hot air from the engine bay, which is actually going to decrease power, which is pretty much the opposite of what you're trying to achieve by fitting an induction kit. The only thing you really gain is the sound. And if you're really after the power, then the stock airbox is plenty fine for running bigger power. I mean, this thing, 300 horsepower, still got the stock airbox. All that we've changed is the panel filter from the standard Toyota paper one to the Cosworth foam filter, which gives it enough air for the supercharger to breathe and still make lots of power. Pretty much if you were running like 400 horsepower, you might find that the standard airbox is a bit of a restriction, but if you're not running 400 horsepower, just keep the stock airbox. Number 10, big brake kits. Personally, I think big brake kits should only be fitted to cars with superchargers, turbochargers, or bigger engine swaps. If you're still running the standard 2-litre FA20 and you're not pushing more than 230, 240 horsepower, then the standard braking system is more than up for the job. All you got to do, put in some decent pads, make sure the discs are in good health, maybe give it some cold air intakes and remove those front fog lights, decent fluid, decent hoses. Those brakes are fine for the job. It's only really when you go supercharged, turbocharged, or you do an engine swap and you're exceeding about 240, 250 horsepower that you really need a big brake kit. Because with all that extra power and torque, you're going to need much bigger brakes to rope it all in when you need to come to a stop. But yes, standard engine, less than 240 horsepower, just upgrade the standard brakes. They're plenty good for the job. And that is my top 10 list. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's useful for anybody who's like a first-time BRZ or GT86 owner who is looking to modify their car, because let's face it, that's what this car is all about. But hopefully, using my experience, I can save you a lot of the pitfalls, save you a lot of time and a lot of headache. But thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, subscribe, the usual thing, and we'll see you next time. Adios.